Thanks, Kristen. Welcome everyone to this second set of process studies in our webinar series. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today, Paquita Svedema and Jens Redemann. Paquita received her master's degree in civil engineering from MIT and a PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Colorado. After appointments at the University of Arizona and the University of Colorado, she's been at Rosenstiel School for Marine and Atmospheric Sciences in Miami since 2004, where she's now a professor. She'll be presenting the first process study today, LASIC, the layered Atlantic smoke interactions with clouds. And the second speaker, Jens Redemann, he received a master in physics from the Free University of Berlin in Germany and a PhD in atmospheric sciences from UCLA. After working at the Bay Area Environmental Research Institute in Sonoma in California, he's been at NASA Ames Research Center since 2012. And the process studies that he'll be presenting is oracles, observations of aerosols above clouds and their interactions. Thanks a lot to both of the presenters. We're looking forward to hear your talks. With that, I'll hand over to Paquita.
Thank you, Caroline. So I'm representing the Department of Energy deployment of their ARM mobile facility, which is depicted on this first slide. It's in its up to recent deployment in Brazil. These vans are now in New York, and instruments are getting recalibrated and examined before they go to Ascension Island for the LASIK deployment, which is beginning in just a few months already. So, and it's a 17-month deployment. LASIK, so LASIK is going to Ascension Island, and what I'm showing at the bottom here is annual mean sea level pressure map with, you see the subtropical high in the South Atlantic and the trade winds that stream around it towards the equator. And so the Ascension Island is located right in the trade wind cumulus region there. So this image of the AMF-1 from Brazil shows a lot of pretty opaque low clouds above it. The cloud types that we're anticipating at Ascension are not going to be so vertically developed. It's very much in the trade wind regime. And this is, Ascension is a volcanic island on the Atlantic Ridge, and the site where the instruments will be are on the backside from what you see in this photograph. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, this shows the sea surface temperature distribution. These colored contours. This is the September mean, and the gray is the mean cloud fraction. So there's a significant subtropical stratocumulus deck here, and Ascension Island is on its on the periphery of that. This is starting at 60% cloud fraction here, and this shows the monthly mean thermodynamic annual cycle over Ascension Island, and you see this kind of double lobe structure here that is typical of this regime. So one of the objectives for going there is to look more closely at the thermodynamic constraints on the low cloud amount. So this is a big uncertainty in climate models. That it's this Bonny and Dufresne paper from 2005 was very good at bringing visibility to that, and interest and keeps remaining in that regime, because we still don't really have a good way to easily think about how low cloud amount should change in the future climate. So that's one motivation for it. And the other is, so this was the slide that was used to advertise this webinar. These are space-based LiDAR curtains of aerosols, and these show the wide extent of shortwave absorbing smoke aerosols in the atmosphere. So they emanate out of continental Africa, but then they spread over the entire remote Atlantic, including out to Ascension Island, which is about here. So that makes this a new low cloud regime that the Department of Energy ARM program has not yet interrogated well yet. So that was a main motivator for them wanting to put their AMF facility out there. So this shows the seasonal cycle from during the biomass burning season. It spans from about July through October. September is the month with the most extensive low cloud deck, as well as the furthest extent of the smoke. So LASIC will be out there for it spans two of these biomass burning seasons, so that's pretty nice, both for 2016 and for 2017. So the reason why the smoke above cloud regime is of interest is, there's the direct radiative effect. So depending on what the underlying surface is for smoke, the top of atmosphere albedo can either be increased or decreased relative to the background. Depending on the cloud and aerosol vertical structure. So the two things that this varies the most with are the single scattering albedo of the smoke, so how much of the sunlight it absorbs, and then the albedo of the underlying surface there. So this I think Jens may show a figure of this, but this is there's a wide range in climate models in this in this direct radiative effect. So another point of interest is that so when the smoke is present overhead, all other things held constant, you would expect the Southeast Atlantic to look darker from space, but in fact the opposite happens, that when you have smoke in the atmosphere, the Southeast Atlantic actually looks brighter from space. So there's a nice paper by Eric Wilcox showing that clouds are thicker when the smoke is present, and other papers have highlighted that the cloud fraction increases. So, and here I'm showing it in a composite of pristine and polluted conditions based on the MODIS fine mode aerosol fraction, and this top red plots are the albedo from series, and mean values are shown in here. And the bottom two plots are MODIS low cloud fraction and the lower tropospheric stability, the main environmental parameter that low clouds are sensitive to. And you'd see that when the atmosphere is more polluted, that it's also more stable and more clouds are present. So these kind of things have, So the main aerosol cloud interaction in that region is what's known as the semi-direct effect, where these shortwave absorbing aerosols are thought to increase the stability that the clouds are responsive to. So these have informed the hypotheses and goals of LASIC. So one is to document the single scattering albedo of the smoke that comes over Ascension Island, and see if there's a seasonal cycle in it, as has been documented over land. So using aeronet data, and to evaluate how the low cloud properties vary as a function of the aerosol loft, and understand that separately from meteorology, and see if the smoke aerosols get entrained into the boundary layer and then affect the cloud properties themselves. And another goal that we have is to evaluate how the boundary layer evolves between St. Helena Island and Ascension Island. So that, I haven't said anything about that yet, so let's see, maybe I'll show that next first. So there's also another island here, St. Helena Island. It's also part of the same Mid-Atlantic ridge. And the Ascension Island is somewhat downstream of St. Helena Island in the boundary layer flow. So we also have some supplementary instruments that we hope to get put on St. Helena Island, and then we can evaluate how the boundary layer evolves more closely during that time period. So, and here the radiosondes on the right here show the different cloud regimes between the two. So St. Helena is the red. It's a shallower, more stratified, better mixed boundary layer. And then as the air moves over towards Ascension Island, the sea surface temperatures increase, it becomes more moist, and it deepens on the way. And I also wanted to show this slide here. So this is the one in situ information data point we have from Ascension Island on the entrainment of smoke into the boundary layer. And this was taken during a stopover flight by the UK Met Office as they were going back and forth to South Africa, or Southern Africa, as part of the safari experiment in 2000. But you just see this increase in the accumulation mode aerosols and increased scattering that was attributed to smoke. So there is a website put up about this campaign on the ARM website, and there's a science plan that you can link to it there that has more complete documentation about this campaign. I thought I have a few slides that summarize the instruments that are going. So there's a whole suite of aerosol and chemistry instrumentation, and things I can point out on here are, there's the UHSAS, which measures a wide, the full range of aerosol sizes, and a cloud condensation nuclei counter, so that measures the number of aerosols that are activated and able to nucleate clouds. This SP2 is important for measuring the amount of black carbon mass in the boundary layer. SMPS is another aerosol size distribution measurement. There's the PAS, which is useful for measuring the aerosol absorption and scattering at 3 different wavelengths, and then that's used to measure it at both dry and humidified sizes. Let's see, the CPC is another, it's a fine particle counter, and this PSAP is useful for measuring the aerosol absorption. So we have some redundant measurements of the aerosol absorption, which is what we need to get the single scattering albedo out there. So that's the aerosol stuff. And the cloud instrumentation, so this is the list of it. One thing, let's see, I'll highlight a few of these. So one is this, the instrument we have for measuring the aerosol vertical structure. So we'll be very interested to see how much of the aerosol that's in the free troposphere makes it down into the boundary layer where it can interact with the cloud. And the main instrument we have for assessing that is going to be the micropulse LiDAR, which, and then there's a suite of different cloud radars. And one thing I can say about those, so that there's a couple that are scanning, and if you look at the layout on the island, so okay, it's an island with some orography to it. It has this mountain here, and the site that we have is in the receives the prevailing winds. So we'll use, and we're anticipating that we'll have orographic effects on the cloud distribution. So one thing we can do with the scanning radars is to look out over our view of the ocean and scan out to 10, 20 kilometers and document the cloud vertical structure, the cloud bases, cloud tops over a much larger volume than you can do than if you're just pointing straight up. So, this is kind of a remote site, and we wanted that to be away from other aerosol sources and also electrical interference on the island. The island is just bristling with technology for BBC broadcast to West Africa from there, for example. So the airfield is there, and this is where the balloons will be launched. So one drawback of this site is that it's up at 365 meters, so it's missing the lower part of the boundary layer, which is why we're launching the balloons from from the airfield, which is much closer to the sea level. And this is the view of the site. So it does have the mountain to the back, but we do have a pretty broad view of the ocean in front of us. And oh yeah, I wanted to highlight that we will have the first documentation of the diurnal cycle in the remote Atlantic through LASIK, which will be valuable for evaluating the radiative heating of the layer that the aerosol is occupying, and also for relating the diurnal cycle of the cloud structure to the thermodynamics. So there's one way that, well, many of you are aware that climate models tend to underestimate low cloud amount, and one way that people understand that is as a too quick dissipation of the cloud during the course of the day. So this suggests that we can use Ascension as a test bed for evaluating climate model depictions of low clouds to see if we can capture the diurnal cycle right, then we may be able to do better with their depiction for climate projections as well. So this will be my last slide, and that is to mention that there's a lot of, there's opportunities for guest instrumentation if other people want to bring things there, and that my role with LASIK is to just to have gotten their facility there, but the data sets themselves will be made publicly available many within the day that they are gathered, for example, the radiosondes. And DOE has funding opportunities that anybody can submit a proposal to use their data, or you don't have to go to DOE, you can go to NSF or whatever, but it's all publicly available data. And there's also a email distribution list if anybody's interested in being on it. And this is a list of people that contributed to, including Jens, to the successful proposal to bring the instrumentation to Ascension Island. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Jens.
Great. Thanks, Paquita. Real quick before we move on, are there any clarification questions for Paquita? You can raise your hand or type in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds and then we'll move on. Great. Okay, we'll take all questions after Jens is done. Jens, go ahead and say hello. I think you're off mute, and test your audio.
I'm here. Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you nice and clear. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. The purpose of co-presenting these studies that Paquita just talked about and that I will be talking about here is that they were very much co-developed in connection with a whole slew of other studies that I will hopefully get a chance to touch on. So the project that I'll be reporting on here is also very much in its infancy. We did get funded at the end of 2014, but have spent essentially the last year seeking permissions for operating NASA aircraft from Namibia in southern Africa. The study is called Aerosols, Observations of Aerosols Above Clouds and Their Interactions, and it's a NASA Earth Venture suborbital project. Without further ado here, what I'll be telling you about, I will give you one slide on what the EVSS program is all about. I thought this audience may not have heard about it before, but then I'll go straight into very much the aerosol radiation and aerosol cloud interaction problems that the Southeast Atlantic presents. I'll not harp on some of them as Paquita has touched on them already, but then I'll tell you a little bit more about the details of Aerosols. Okay, the NASA Earth Venture Suborbital Program. It was recommended by the decadal survey that some of you may have helped design, that NASA engage in an Earth Venture program with rotating three rotating components. One is called EVM, Earth Venture Missions. One is called EVI, Earth Venture Instruments, and then EVS, Earth Venture Suborbitals. The idea behind all EV programs is essentially that they were supposed to be complete in the sense of in the case of the suborbitals, they're complete suborbital PI-led investigations. They're supposed to be science question or science hypothesis driven. The suborbital missions are supposed to be temporally sustained. So normal duration of these is 5 years. As NASA has defined them, the requirements are that these projects make measurements that address weaknesses in current Earth system models, produce data sets that identify or characterize important phenomena that we're struggling with in the Earth system, and make measurements that may apply to multiple Earth science focus areas. So of interdisciplinary nature would be of advantage in proposing to these. And then beyond that, preference is given to investigations that make use of current or NASA or non-NASA satellite capabilities, augment or complement current projects that are ongoing in the Earth Science Research Program within NASA. Those that contribute to the Applied Sciences Program within NASA will be given special consideration, and also those that contribute to the planning of future satellite observations or enhancements in Earth system models. You're supposed to have mature technology, and they are cost and schedule constrained. As I said, they get competed every 4 to 5 years because that's about the duration. In each cycle, NASA selects about 5 investigations, and in the last call there were 35 that were competing, and we were one of the 5 that were selected. Okay, moving on to the science. Paquita set this up quite nicely. So we're interested in aerosol radiation interactions and aerosol cloud interactions, very much as defined and categorized in the last IPCC report. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at direct effect and semi-direct effect, and semi-direct effect essentially being interpreted as cloud adjustments to the direct effect. We're also interested within oracles in indirect effects. So we do have some indications of aerosol mixing into these clouds in the southeast Atlantic, and that then may change cloud lifetimes and other thermodynamic effects, although I will go on record here saying that these indirect effects are sort of the higher hanging fruit within the NASA, within the oracles program anyways. And I'll talk about that, how we structured that a little bit more in a second. As I introduced, the EVSs are supposed to be addressing shortcomings in current models. And if you think about the direct, semi-direct, and indirect effect of aerosols on climate, I would venture to say that we could probably make a lot of improvements in our estimates of direct effects by just fixing and improving the properties of aerosols and clouds in the models, with the exception of maybe some radiative interactions, 3D effects that could and should be considered. I think we understand most of the processes quite well. For semi-direct effects and indirect effects, it's very much a matter of making measurements that help improve model processes, as Paquita indicated also, while also making control measurements of meteorologically co-varying parameters. So that's maybe good enough as an introduction. NASA has had a history, as you probably are aware, of doing satellite-based aerosol and cloud observations. But the Southeast Atlantic is a very, very complicated environment because of the coexistence of the aerosols and clouds for a big duration of the year. So this is a curtain plot now from the side of one of those that Paquita showed earlier in her slide. And you can see here where the red arrow is pointing that these biomass burning layers are massive and extensive in spatial scale here. So on the bottom here, the scale is degrees latitude, so they reach from the equator to 20 south. That's not at all unusual. And they very, very often overlie these low-level stratocumulus clouds that Paquita talked about, and that makes for a very difficult observational system because the contrast that the aerosols give in the passive imagery that we're using from MODIS and MISR and other satellites is a very faint signal. So the quantitative characterization of these aerosols is still eluding us greatly. Okay. The aerosol directradiative effects, if to focus just on one of the 3 components of direct, semi-direct, and indirect, we know that is supposed to be the simplest of the 3 problems, but we know that our models struggle greatly with this. So what you're looking at here is from a paper by Philip Steer 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago now, that was sort of making a comparison of how some of the models that include aerosol effects in the AeroCom model intercomparison initiative compare globally with aerosol direct radiative effects. And this is assuming already that many of the aerosol properties are prescribed, and a number of other things are prescribed too, so that you're looking at what they call host model differences. And you can see here that the 4 models on the left, this is CAM, and this is GoCard, and GEOS, this was GeosCam, and the GIF model. Even if you just picked out 4 of these 16 or so models that participated, you see great differences in the assessment of direct radiative effects at the top of the atmosphere, going from no effect at all to a slight cooling effect on the northern edge of the basin, to even a warming effect as indicated by the yellow colors. And if you look at the model means and the model standard deviations, you see that in the Southeast Atlantic there's sort of a hot spot of warming, undoubtedly to do with the absorbing aerosols overlying the relatively bright clouds. And then the models also show a hot spot of model disagreement. Again, this is not just driven by the aerosol. This is not driven by the aerosol properties, more driven probably by the cloud properties as they affect the underlying albedo. Moving on here, just to highlight one of the studies. This comes out of Rob Wood's group, where they used the CAM model to basically introduce these aerosols and run the model with and without the aerosols present, and they came up with this stabilization effect that Paquita mentioned of something like 1 Kelvin stabilization of the lower troposphere, which may induce an increase in low cloud cover by something like 5% if we look at some of these parametrizations. And that, of course, a 5% increase in cloud cover would make a significant difference. But it's very difficult to observe these independently of other meteorological changes, and Paquita's group has published on this. Suffice it to say that all of these results are very, very sensitive to the details of the aerosol and cloud properties. So again, motivating a study that looks at both properties and processes at the same time. Paquita showed this figure of the smoke location sort of moving southward during the biomass burning season from July, August, September, and October, and how the clouds develop. And I just bring it up here again to motivate the fact that our airborne campaigns that I'll be talking about here are scheduled to go in 3 separate months in 3 different years. So we're planning to go and target the September season in this year, 2016, and then we will go and look at the October properties and processes in 2017. And in 2018, we're focusing on the month of October, essentially. Okay. Again, to motivate our lack of knowledge on properties, this is a representation of the Aeronet ground-based sun photometer retrievals of aerosol properties, and on the left side, aerosol optical thickness, and on the right-hand side, single scattering albedo. Showing that the loading peaks sometime in early September, and that there's sort of a intraseasonal increase in single scattering albedo, meaning a decrease in aerosol absorption indicated, or at least during the biomass burning season. But these studies these trends are from very, very sparse ground-based sun photometer networks that have a long list of restrictions on their retrievals. And it is completely unclear at this moment whether this is a near fire development only, or whether this kind of a trend due to potentially some condensation of volatile components onto the biomass burning aerosols that formed initially, whether that kind of a trend would hold for farther downwind and down the transport pattern. So aerosol absorption as a main driver is an important thing that we're trying to look at. And then mixing is the other important issue here. And we have indications from several studies that the presence of aerosols essentially suppresses precipitation, and that is all well and good, but the problem is that satellites suffer greatly and struggle greatly with identifying such cloud aerosol mixing. So when and where the aerosol mixes into the low cloud deck is unclear. We have some indication from the Calypso LiDAR measurements that Paquita mentioned. So in red here, you're looking at aerosol layer top heights in the Southeast Atlantic as a function of distance from shore from right to left. You see that this is longitude boxes here in 5-degree bins going from the shore towards the west, essentially in August, September, and October. and the blue bars, histogram bars here, are the cloud top heights. And you can see that with distance offshore, the aerosol layer top heights decrease probably under general subsidence, and the cloud top heights increase commensurate with the increase in marine boundary layer height that Paquita mentioned. So we would expect the greatest likelihood of mixing of these aerosols into the clouds farthest offshore and earliest in the season, according to this analysis. But there are a lot of caveats to this too, in that these measurements are based on sort of mid-visible extinction, which is only a medium good indicator of the presence of CCN, meaning very small aerosol particles that would have the most significant effect on these clouds. So whether this holds in a suborbital study and in situ study is to be seen. So just to summarize how we think the Southeast Atlantic sets up, we have this lofting of the aerosols over the ocean, over the continent, in the fire region, and then this transport offshore and general subsidence and the thickening of the marine boundary layer. And we like to call this the natural laboratory for studying aerosol radiation and aerosol cloud interactions. In that we probably would expect more direct and semi-direct effects early on, more semi-direct effects in the medium range, maybe with some induced cloud thickening, and then later on potentially some mixing. And as I said, there are a number of studies out there that have tried to look at this now, but all of them come back and say, the detailed knowledge on aerosol and cloud properties and some of the linking processes is really missing in this region, motivating our studies. So we have set out with 3 separate goals. The colors here indicate direct effect in red, semi-direct effects in purple, and indirect effects in green. I won't bore you with the details other than to say that from these airborne platforms we can sort of make very detailed studies of radiative fluxes and flux divergences and heating rates within the atmosphere that then influence cloud structure and condensate. So we're very much trying to look at the whole vertical structure as much as we can. This is a science traceability matrix. It's a monster that's required by the EV program, essentially. And I won't bore you with the details other than to say that we have an extensive aerosol in situ and radiation package within oracles. And I'll tell you in a second what platforms we're going to use. But we have optical depth measurements, in situ measurements, chemical composition measurements with AMS and SP2. High gear is a Hawaii package for aerosol in situ measurements, extinction, absorption. PTI, if Art Sedlacek is involved. We have some gas measurements, mostly to tag sort of plume age, distance from fires, kind of, or age of the biomass burning. And then we have extensive cloud measurements both in situ from a number of packages, including CAPS and PDI, but also, again, remote sensing oriented with SSFR, which is spectral flux radiometers, liquid water path from a King probe, and CAPS again, PDI. We are planning to fly a newly developed multi-channel Doppler radar from JPL that's now termed APR3. Hopefully a microwave radiometer. That's still TBD a little bit. And then we have extensive radiation measurements with, again, irradiance measurements from SSFR, direct beam measurements with the 4-star instruments here at NASA Ames, and a number of remote sensing instruments. And so to tell you a little bit more about the mission itself, so we're planning to make all of these airborne measurements in addition to establishing 2 new Aeronet sites. One we would hope to establish on St. Helena that Paquita mentioned, because there's no Aeronet instrument there. One we're hoping to establish here at somewhere on the coast in Angola, because if you look at the Aeronet network, there's essentially no measurements near the coast. We are planning 3 4-week campaigns, one each in 2016, 17, and 2018. We have about 115 flight hours with the low-level, the profiling aircraft, and the NASA P3. And in one of the years, we're bringing the ER2 aircraft, which is essentially sort of a satellite simulator platform. I'll tell you in a second what's on that mission, but it's essentially our own little satellite that we can direct where we need it to go. All NASA data will be publicly available 1 year after collection, sooner for science team members. That 1 year gives you gives the PIs time to quality assure their data. And our operations base is indeed Walvis Bay. We received in December permission to operate from Namibia, which was not a trivial task to do. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that we have on the Oracles team very much a core contingency of modelers at different scales. So we have LES modeling represented by Andy Ackerman, regional scale modeling with Wharf Chem by the Iowa group with Pablo Saide and Greg Carmichael. And then we have global climate model now represented both by collaborators in Great Britain who are running the unified model and Met Office model, but also now through Alindo da Silva at Goddard. Maybe just to say that we very much plan to make model relevant measurements through our flight planning to begin with. So we have 2 types of flights. One we call the routine flights, which we plan to fly along constant latitude lines. I didn't mention that very well here, but so these all are different types of flight plans that we have. This is not the best slide. Apologies here for my disorder. Here is a good slide. So this black line here represents what we call the routine flight plan, and we don't know exactly whether it will be at the exact latitude of St. Helena, but the basic idea is that we go from Walvis Bay somewhere near the aerosol and cloud centroid, climatological centroids, and then just fly along a constant latitude line out into the southeast Atlantic. I'm trying to click on the slides below and move, but that's not working. Let's see. I mentioned that. I mentioned data availability. I mentioned where we're flying from. Okay. Yeah, and then so we'll be spending half of our flight time in these routine flights, and then the other half will be targets of opportunity, where we're targeting a specific feature either in the cloud or the aerosol field that we see in the geostationary satellite. So we do have suitcase flights to Ascension planned, possibly to Sao Tome as well, and then these other flights are either across the aerosol plume or across gradients in interesting features in the cloud field. I think I'm going to skip sort of the details of what we're planning to do on these routine flights. I'll just tell you again that we sort of have 2 aircraft participating, a low-level in situ P3 aircraft that has about a 10-hour duration, and an ER2 high-flying aircraft with a number of remote sensing instruments that are of great importance to NASA because they're sort of simulators for future satellite missions. So we're planning to fly a high spectral resolution LiDAR, 5-channel, 3-wavelength system out of Langley, and 2 types of polarimeters, the research scanning polarimeter, an airborne prototype of the instrument that was supposed to go on the Glory mission recently, and then an imaging polarimeter out of JPL called AirMISPI, and EMAS, which is an enhanced MODIS airborne simulator. So we're creating a data set for NASA that can test future satellite missions. Just to go briefly over the science team, Paquita and Rob were instrumental in writing the proposal and are on the leadership team together with myself. And then we have a bunch of modelers or retrieval people in green here. Colors are not coming out great. Sort of some observationalist remote sensing types in blue. and then the P3 people all here in red flying sort of a mix of in situ and remote sensing platforms. We have international collaborators, which I just wanted to mention briefly here. So these international missions have buoyed each other in the sense that as soon as one of the funding agencies heard that the other ones were funded, with one exception, that worked to help make positive decisions for the other ones as well. So I have LASIC here on Ascension, sort of very regional. I have Aerosols in blue here, sort of with a larger range. There's a British CLIVAR effort that's trying to fly the UK BAE 146 aircraft in 2016 only, so they're only going 1 year. Aerosol SA is a French effort to fly a polarimeter and do some ground-based in situ measurements in Namibia. SEALS SA is a currently forming study in Southern Africa trying to organize the regional scientists to do sort of more integrative, regional scale, process-oriented studies, and that's very much in the making, and we're hoping to contribute to that. So I'll just summarize here real quick that we're trying to look at properties of aerosols and clouds and key processes that link these biomass burning aerosols with the stratocumulus cloud deck that ties into the Namibian coastal fog system, which is an important moisture source for the Namibian ocean ecosystem there. Also, we're hoping to make some ocean color measurements that hopefully tie back into ocean ecosystem health, and hopefully the SEALS SA umbrella will help us forge research collaborations. You can sort of learn all you need to know at this stage at this about Oracle at this website, ESPO website here. The address is on the bottom. So I'll stop here, and thank you for having us.
Great, thanks, Jan. Let me go ahead and get Takeda off mute, and while I'm doing that, if folks want to type in any questions or raise their hand, and I can take you off mute, and we'll go into Q&A.